you feel that? A cold breath of damp air, the hush of needles underfoot, and just beyond your lamp, a carpet that lives. Tonight, the ground answers back. On a ridge where the fog holds its shape like a secret, a little logger blinks a tiny waveform, a pulse, hours after someone walked the trail. This is the moment. Find somewhere quiet. Headphones on if you have them. Tonight's story is called Mycelial Memory, the fungi that remember footsteps. I'm Sam Nang. Listen closely now. The forest is not only seen, it remembers.
The person who found this wasn't a scientist at first. She was a volunteer on a late evening ground survey. Boots caked in mud, a headlamp that painted the trunk silver, a notebook in one hand and a little camera on a stake in the other. Her name was Mara, steady, polite, the sort of person who notices small things because they matter to her. She came to the ridge to map trail erosion, not to make history. Under the beach and the moss, mycelium spreads, a vast, unseen filament network. Mostly we talk about mushrooms because they're easy to see, but the mycelial mat is the nervous system under the forest carpet. It carries nutrients, signals, and sometimes, according to careful study, tiny electrical ripples. Scientists have measured voltage changes across fungal threads. That's real. That's in the textbooks. What Mara noticed was different. It wasn't present only when she pressed a probe into a colony. It came, nights later, in a pattern that matched footsteps. The first strange event happened on a Tuesday. Mara set a time-lapse camera and a small, low-power logger beside a mossy mat. She walked the trail at dusk with a ranger as part of a routine patrol. Their boots crunched, a flashlight winked. Hours later, she reviewed the logger and saw a spike, a neat little blip in the waveform, about 2 hours after they passed. She could have blamed a storm, a raccoon, a dodgy battery. Instead, she logged the event and walked away. She did not dig. She did not harvest. She logged it.
Then the pattern kept coming. Night after night, similar spikes cropped up at roughly the same place, always offset from human passage by hours, always with the same rhythm, a quick rise, a settled plateau, a tiny decline. Not every night, not every pass, but enough to sketch a corridor in the data, a narrow trace that overlapped the search perimeter from a decades-old missing person case nearby. Do the patterns mean the forest was remembering footsteps? Or was it a trick of wires and weather, a ghost conjured by correlation? Here's where things get interesting.
I wanted to know exactly what those pulses could be, so I called a mycologist who spends long days kneeling with fungi, Dr. Elena Cortez. She told me that fungi do produce electrical activity, slow waves, action potential like spikes, related to nutrient flow, stress, and interaction with roots or microbes. She laughed softly when I said, memory. It's not a memory like ours. It's a distributed biochemical pattern that can, under some conditions, bear the imprint of a disturbance. Think more like a ripple pattern than a diary entry.
Next, I spoke with an electrophysiologist who works with environmental sensors. He was meticulous, almost painfully careful with language. He pointed out sources of noise, moisture shifts after rain, tiny selenoids of root activity, arthropods tunneling, and even the coupling of electrode to substrate, the difference between touching fabric and touching skin. A spike on a logger is a signal plus 1,000 possible imposters. He warned me, correlation is fragile. But he also said the patterns Mara logged were worth a controlled follow-up, not a headline.
And then there was search and rescue. Practical, human, urgent. I reached a SAR coordinator who'd worked missing person cases in remote woodlands for 20 years. She told me what volunteers mean when they say a place feels different. She also told me what evidence looks like: footprints, broken branches, a last cigarette butt. Biological signals were not evidence by themselves. But she said something that stuck. If a biological pattern consistently points to the same corridor, it's a place you put your eyes on. With care. With professionals. Not with pry bars and adrenaline. This is the turning point. A family, alerted by an old report and a new volunteer's curiosity, asked for any leads. They wanted hope. Mara faced a decision: stay quiet or say something that might start a chain reaction. She chose caution. She told the lead investigator, who requested a careful, non-invasive field test. The moment of disclosure meant there was no going back. Someone had to balance gratitude, curiosity, and the real risk of turning a living thing into a tool for a lonely hope.
The field test was clinical and slow. Sterile loggers, gloves, no digging, all language borrowed from labs and courtrooms. They re-walked the corridor at measured intervals, placed passive sensors at several distances, recorded humidity and soil conductance, and photographed everything in place. At one point, rangers and scientists crouched together in the dark, watching a monitor show a tiny spike. Everyone held their breath, not because the machine screamed, but because hope is loud in quiet rooms.
As the night deepened, the spikes came and went, but the results were careful, patterns that suggested some interaction, not a definitive human trace signature. The electrophysiologist flagged coupling artifacts. A sensor barely touching a root can light up like a bell. The mycologist noticed insect activity increases after dusk. The SAR team cross-referenced tracks and found animal prints that could explain some of the corridor's signal. The conclusion was not dramatic. It was, in fact, a model of scientific humility, an intriguing lead, insufficient alone, worthy of more study and more caution.
There are consequences. An agency issued guidelines: don't harvest fungal mats, document in place, photograph with scale, avoid GPS coordinates in public notes to prevent amateur interference, and if it's potentially evidentiary, hand it off to accredited labs. The family was kept informed. No miraculous resolution followed, but the corridor got remapped, more boots walked it with care, and the scientists had a better data set. The story didn't end with closure. It ended with protocols. Small, slow, grounded steps toward responsible curiosity.
And the last image I want you to carry is very simple: the waveform. Imagine it stretched across moss and loam, a tiny heartbeat superimposed on the forest's own rhythm. It resists tidy answers. Sometimes it whispered of footsteps. Sometimes it spoke of roots and rain. It reminded everyone involved that the natural world is intelligent in its own ways, but not an oracle for human desire. There is humility required when you listen to living systems. Humility and restraint.
Before we close, a few practical things I must say, and I mean this clearly. Do not dig up or harvest fungal mats. Do not attach DIY electrodes to living networks. If you find something odd on a trail, photograph it in place. Note non-GPS descriptive context, the nearest sign, trail junction, time of day, and contact local authorities, park scientists, or an accredited mycology lab. Leave no trace isn't just etiquette. It's protection for fragile ecosystems and for any potential investigations that may follow.
We are left with a forest that remembers in ways we do not yet understand. That small corridor of pulses remains a question with footnotes, promising, ambiguous, and ethically charged. It taught a volunteer to resist the urge to harvest a mystery, and taught agencies to write careful policies. The story is not a solved mystery. It's an example of how curiosity and caution
can travel together.
If this episode stayed with you, please subscribe so you never miss a story that walks that border between beauty and dread. If you're out on a trail and you see something odd, photograph, note the time, and reach out to professionals rather than trying to become one that night. And if this story moved you, share it with someone who listens in the dark. Until next time, check the corners. The ground remembers. The night remembers. And so do we.